This is going to be a very brief presentation on Transcendental Phenomenology, also known as Husserlian Phenomenology. Husserl, the founder of phenomenology, understood that subjects were always connected to objects, or the world, meaning the subject or the I was always meaningfully connected to everything else in the world. This idea upturned centuries of Western philosophy, as previous to this, Descartes had argued for a very egocentric interpretation of the world, explaining that everything existed in our minds, and it couldn't even be thought of as real, that appearances were creations of the mind. In contrast, phenomenology understands appearances as manifestations of being. These manifestations of being are the ways in which we find ourselves in relation to the world through our everyday living. In Husserlian phenomenology, or transcendental phenomenology, the intended meanings are conceived in a human's consciousness, which is always directed towards something else, an object or another subject. The term intentionality is central to understanding transcendental phenomenology. Intentionality should not be interpreted as meaning the intent of something or someone. Instead, in phenomenology, it should be interpreted as the meaning. It should be interpreted as meaning the interconnectedness of something. It should be thought of as this interconnected web that connects humans to their surroundings and to others in many meaningful ways. Sometimes we're conscious of these connections and sometimes we're not. Sartre described intentionality in a slightly different way. He explained that it was the ways in which we burst forth into the world. In essence, phenomenology studies the phenomenon and the intentional relationships that appear and manifest. Another very important concept in transcendental phenomenology is the concept of essence. Husserl was not really interested in arriving at subjective meanings or predictive or explanatory meanings of human experience. Instead, Husserl examined intentional and interconnected meanings that presented themselves to derive their essential qualities or their essence. Husserl's essence wasn't about determining an understanding of a core meaning of something, but more he was interested in capturing what makes something something. For example, what makes love love? And what is love for humans as expressed through their intentional and interconnected relationships with each other and the world? So when we take a Husserlian transcendental phenomenological approach to research, we generally take a descriptive approach. And for Husserl to be true to his methods, he articulated them in a philosophical manner. And they were maybe not necessarily created to serve for scientific research purposes. So therefore, we're going to turn to modern day phenomenologists who conduct research in the Husserlian tradition, particularly Georgi. And he says, when approaching phenomenology from a Husserlian perspective, we stay true to his perspective by emphasizing three things: descriptions of others, bracketing the phenomenological reduction, and invariant psychological meanings, which are Georgi's slight variation on essential meanings. So Georgi explains we can't get to essential meanings, so let's try to get to invariant meanings that are, close and don't change as often. Now, within this type of approach, the participants and the researchers' roles are very clearly defined. The participant describes the experience, and the researcher takes in the raw data and analyzes it. Okay, now we have several steps to the descriptive methodological approach that we're going to discuss. So the very first step is to collect your data. This data collection comes in the forms of interviews and written descriptions. Then you want to analyze these descriptions. Now, it's important that the descriptive researcher doesn't interpret the data or try to resolve the ambiguities. They just try to describe the ambiguities as they present themselves. And this takes a little bit of self-control on the researcher to try to resist this compulsion to resolve and interpret the data. And it calls for bracketing. Bracketing comes from Husserl's idea that one transcends the idea of the perspective of human consciousness. This is a kind of difficult task for most of us to transcend human consciousness. Thus, rather, when conducting this research, we attempt to bracket, kind of put to the side, all of our past knowledge and judgments and understandings so that we can be open to the raw data from a very fresh, biased, unbiased perspective. Then that brings us to number 3, whole, part, whole analysis. In Transcendental Phenomenology, it's a very structured process where one first creates an entire transcript of the interview, one reads the entire transcript to get a sense for the whole. Then the researcher goes in and starts breaking apart the transcript, noting things that seem to shift the meaning of the transcript. So you may do this by coding, you may do this with marginal notes. There are many different ways. Then finally, the researcher looks at the whole of the data again, and the researcher tries to come up with invariant meanings or invariant structures within the whole of the text. So invariant structures of meanings are a really important feature of descriptive phenomenology. Invariant meanings are similar to Husserl's essences, but instead of pursuing this ever-elusive universal essence that's very hard to get at, we're pursuing an invariant or non-changing meaning that belongs to a particular structure or particular context. Then finally, once you've arrived at these invariant meanings after your analysis, you communicate them via a dissertation or research article. Finally, this brings us to our very last slide, the resources slide. All of the information in this presentation was derived from these 3 sources. So if you're interested in conducting transcendental phenomenological research in the future, I definitely suggest that you check these out. Thanks for watching.